Hello and welcome to Spiritual Radiance Radio. You are with Lisa and Helen, and we are the Red Sisterhood movement. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, our topic of conversation is going to be around misunderstanding. First and foremost, let me just remind you of what the Red Sisterhood movement is all about. Helen and I created the Red Sisterhood movement because we wanted a safe space for all women. No matter where you're from, no matter what you believe in, no matter what you look like, whether your idea of heaven is dressing up as a princess or whether your idea of heaven is dressing up as Batman. We wanted to create a safe space for you, a space where we can heal the old witch wound and actually celebrate each other as women, but also honouring our humanness. Do you want to add anything else on that, Helen, quickly?
No, I think you nailed it, Barney.
Thank you very much. So, welcome to the Misunderstanding show. It's a tough one, misunderstanding. I think we've all been misunderstood at some point in our life.
I think it's a certainty. I think it's something we have to be cool with. And I know we're going to explore this further and talk into it more, but I think the first thing that we need to do is just accept that there is times that we are going to be misunderstood. And equally, I'm sure there's times that we misunderstand people too.
Yeah, 100%. I quite like what you said there. It's a certainty. Death, taxes, and misunderstanding. It's the new tagline. But yeah, absolutely. We must understand things all the time. There is a story that I always like to go back to in terms of fables. And some of you might have heard it, some of you might not have, about a quite posh, well-to-do lady in a house is having to get the train to go somewhere. Not a big fan of the train. She likes to be driven places, but in this instance, she has to get the train. She has a £20 note on her mantelpiece. And as she's busy getting herself ready to leave the door, she grabs the £20 note and off she goes to get the train. A little bit anxious, a little bit worried because she's out of a comfort zone. She gets on the train and the only space available is sat next to a quite scruffy, dishevelled woman. A woman who looks unkempt, a little bit dirty. Under protest, this lady sits next to her and promptly falls asleep. She wakes up and her mouth's dry and she thinks, I'd really like to go down to the carriage that has food and get something to eat. So off she goes to get something to eat, opens a bag, and the £20 note's gone. So, of course, the thought that she immediately has is that that lady took it. She goes back and the lady's asleep. So she carefully opens the lady's bag and in there she finds her £20 note. She takes it, closes the bag carefully, goes to the carriage to get food and stays in that carriage until it's time to get off the train. She goes and does whatever she needs to do, has a shopping day, comes back, has to get the train back and gets home. When she gets home, she sees a £20 note still on the mantelpiece. In her anxious state, she forgot to take it. But her misunderstanding of that woman and of herself immediately made her judge that woman on the train. And one thing we're huge on, Helen, is honouring your emotions, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with judgment because that comes from our conditioning and how we see the world. That woman can't help her conditioning from her child, or her childhood rather, but she should begin to challenge it. And it's not until moments like that where sometimes we realise we have something to challenge. I'm going to let you ponder that little story for yourself. I could pick it apart for hours, but that's not why we came on here to talk about misunderstanding. And I'm going to let Helen come in for a second before I go on one of my little rants.
Jeez, thanks for giving me some space. I think it's funny because I know that we could talk about this topic for hours, but I also think it's something that people don't necessarily give a lot of thought. And I think that, like I said earlier, we have to be okay with being misunderstood. And what else I would say is that it's not our responsibility for people to get us. We can't do that. We could spend all day going around the houses trying to give different explanations, asking different questions, trying to get our point across, and somebody can still not get us and can still misunderstand us. So as much as we have to accept that we're going to be misunderstood, for me, we also need to not spend a lot of energy trying to make people understand us, because people will always only understand us from where they are at. Just like in that story that you have just shared, Lise, thanks for that. That lady was coming at life and her judgments from her previous experience and from her conditioning and her programming. And before she found that £20 note, I can imagine that the lady who was sleeping could have challenged her on her beliefs about her assumptions about that lady. And maybe she would never have got through to her. Maybe she would never have made her see things differently, because we always just come to situations from where we are at, whether that's our mood, our emotions, our previous conditioning, our beliefs. I know for a fact I will have misunderstood people. I know for a fact I'll have misunderstood you at times, Lise, and vice versa, just because of where we've been at. And I know that we're both okay with that. We're okay with misunderstanding each other because we're doing our best and we're human and we own that and we have the tough conversations. But we're okay with being misunderstood because we know that our intentions are pure and that we will always own our stuff, our humanness, our emotions. And for me, that's all any of us can do.
Yeah, 100%. You absolutely nailed it there. When it comes to our understanding of the world, it always comes from our own perception of the world. And just like our best looks different every single day, our perception of the world looks different every single day. Some days I'm waking up and I'm full of gratitude and my rose tinted glasses are on and the world is the best place to be. Some days I've got about 2 hours sleep. I've woke up exhausted, and guess what? The world isn't so rosy in those days. My perception is different. But the difference is, what Helen's just said, is we will always own it. If I see things from a different perspective because I'm not in the best of places, I'll still talk about it. I'll still say it because that's a narrative inside me. But I remember listening to somebody talk once and them saying that how they deal with the things inside their head, their perception of the world is, they say, the narrative in my head is this. And I just think that's a really good way to look at things, because actually how you see the world is your narrative. When you are in any situation, they always say, no, there's 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. Perception is everything. And guess what? We really can't trust our own perception of something, because it really is a snapshot of where we are in that moment. As Helen said, we have a fantastic relationship because we're not afraid to have tough conversations. We're not afraid to have a conversation that could momentarily hurt our relationship, but only strengthen it in the long run. Just last week, I think I'd had a night with my daughter where I'd probably slept about an hour. I'd had a couple of to-dos with the husband, and Helen did something for our business in our business best interest. And I was like, oh my God, why is she doing this? What's going on? And a message just not straight away, because that would have been a reaction, but the next day, and I was like, look, Helen, I need to say this out loud. And no, it's not the case. But if I don't say it out loud, it's in my head, it's not going to go anywhere. I said it out loud. We talked about it. Helen will have had feelings from me saying that, but we talked about it and it was okay, because guess what? I'm a human. Yes, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, but my spiritual being doesn't get a lot of airtime on the earth. Not unless I'm meditating or in some lovely, wonderful state. When I'm going to my day-to-day life, the more I lean into that spirit, the easier my day-to-day life is, the less I trigger. But I still trigger. I still have shadow thoughts. I still have feelings and emotions that don't always serve me in that moment. but I'm not afraid to open up to them. There's been thousands of times where Helen and I have done training or things together, and I've shown up because we wouldn't let people down, but I maybe wasn't the best version of myself showing up. And afterwards I might have said, I feel like I brought nothing to the table today. You were on fire and I feel like I wasn't. And that's okay, because I'm not afraid to own that and show my misunderstanding of a situation. Probably had a mad little rant there. I didn't give a lot of info. My favourite thing to do.
I think so. The situation that had occurred last week is a great example. So thanks for bringing that up, Lise, because then, yeah, absolutely. I was like, my ego kicked in because I was like, I'm being misunderstood here. Like, I've done something to help Lisa, and you were like, you were totally misunderstanding me, and I was misunderstanding you, and I was like, I couldn't understand why you were where you were, and you couldn't understand why I'd done what I'd done. And the thing is, had we not just had an open, honest conversation and been like, this is my intention and it was for this reason, and you going, okay, yeah, and this made me feel like this, but I recognize this, that can be detrimental to relationships. And I think that's it. I think the probably number one reason that relationships kind of I want to say fail, but that's such a naff word, don't work out or end up going down the toilet, is lack of communication, like lack of real, open, honest communication, because we misunderstand each other. Even in my own marriage, like there'll be times when I misunderstand Neil and he misunderstands me. And a story that always comes to mind, and I've been talking about it all week, so it's a bit funny that we're having this conversation, is when I've done my TEDx talk. And you'll remember this, Lise. So I'd done a talk on mum guilt, and afterwards, on one of the shares, once it had gone on YouTube, a gentleman kind of popped up and said, it's people like me that were responsible for the male suicide rates. And I laugh now, but at the time I was hurt, because I was like, you are misunderstanding my message and my intention. And a small part of me wanted him to get it. A small part of me wanted him to see why I was sharing what I was sharing. And it wasn't to take anything away from men and dads, because I couldn't share from their experience. I could only share from mine and from the heart about being a mum. But it's just that. And equally, I probably misunderstood what he was saying, because I'm massively triggered and I was hurt. And I think that we do this, whether it's a small daily encounter, like, for example, you go into Tesco and the lady behind the counter is rude, but actually she's just had some devastating news. We misunderstand. And I get it. We cannot spend all day, every day trying to understand, because most of the time we're just never going to get it because of where we're at. And I think the thing is, we just have to own our humanness. We have to own where we're at and accept that we're going to be misunderstood sometimes.
Yeah, that's it. The greatest works of literature are around the fact that human relationships break down because communication breaks down, and because we all have this loop in our head. And I was reading a little extract from a book this morning that was saying that is kind of like a double-edged sword. So our brain goes on a loop of whatever we're thinking about. So say we're anxious about something because, for instance, say that incidents that Helen and I were on about. If I started to really worry about saying to Helen, look, I need to get this out because it's something that's going around in my head, and if I don't get it out, I'm going to make it bigger than it is. Say I was made that so big and I got so anxious about it. I said it, and then I started to worry about how Helen took that and Helen's reaction, and I started to feel anxious about that. Then that anxiety, it deepens in your mind, and then you start to get anxious about feeling anxious because you are worried about worrying, and then you worry about worrying, and it just becomes a cycle. And that's like any emotion. If we hold on to it, anger, you get angry at yourself for being angry when you're getting angry for stupid things. When you're jealous, you then get angry at yourself for being jealous, and it's a vicious cycle. What Helen and I will probably bring to every one of these, which will be a common theme, is just feel your emotions, whatever they are, Lean into them. And misunderstanding kind of is an emotion. When we're misunderstanding something or when we're misunderstood, that is coming from people's pain points. And we can never control how other people see us. And the more you try to, the more you'll kind of cement the idea they have of you in their head, because they're only ever looking at you from their viewpoint. They can only see you from, as Helen said, where they are in that moment. You can't change where they are. So no matter how you present, you will only ever be what they're seeing. So really, our advice on misunderstanding is just to be you. Be you as you are, with a good heart and good intentions. And where you can, be as open and honest in your communication as possible, even if that is, do you know what? The loop that's running in my head today is that you think I'm not good enough. Actually, the loop that's running in your head is probably that you aren't feeling good enough. You're projecting that onto someone else. But just by saying it out loud, A, there's a shift, and B, you're not dumping that on someone else. You're not saying to someone else, you don't think I'm good enough, when you've got to that heightened state of emotion and then you start bleeding over someone that didn't cut you. You're getting it early and you're saying, do you know what? Today I think that you don't feel I'm good enough. And that other person's probably going to be floored. Be like, what? No, of course. What are you on about? This is how I feel. And do you know what? Helen mentioning about a partner, this probably happened about 3 weeks ago. My husband went really quiet and I was like, what's going on? He was like, do you know what? That I've got this feeling that you think I'm not doing enough. And I was like, wow. Actually, right now in this moment, it's probably the opposite. I'm feeling I'm not doing enough. But because we were both quiet and we were both in that zone, you take on things that aren't there. I'll hand you over to Helen again if she, give us some more time.
I think the thing that you mentioned there about the brain, I think that's important. If you don't mind me just revisiting.
No, definitely.
Add in that our brain does this wonderful thing. So, for example, if you came over to my house, Lisa, and your gorgeous baby Winter got all the toy blocks out and made a mess, because she does, and we love her, and that's cool. But if I was in a bad mood one day and I felt like everyone comes to my house and gets the toy blocks out and everyone just takes the mick out of me and thinks that my house is the place that we get the toy blocks out, this is just an example, by the way, so it might sound a bit naff, that I might be fuming one day. And then I might sit and stew on that. And I've totally misunderstood, because you thought, oh, Helen offered us a cuppa and we came over and we had fun and it was lovely. But what my brain then does is go, oh, and remember this time that Lisa came over and she left a Mars bar wrapper on the floor. And remember this time that Lisa came over and she spilled a green tea everywhere. And don't forget that time that Lisa came over and, I don't know, there was a wipe left behind. Like, our brain does this wonderful thing of collecting evidence based on where we're at. So our brain wants us to be right. So if I'm thinking Lisa's taking the mick and letting Winter get the blocks out, my brain will go, awesome, let me think of some more times that Lisa's come over and took the mick. And the thing is, it's just what you're saying, it's just amplifying and it's making it deeper. And for me, we have to think about meaning, because when we're talking about misunderstanding or any kind of scenario or emotion, we have to think about, we have the choice of what meaning we attach to that. So I could go, Lisa takes the mick, Lisa doesn't respect me, Lisa thinks my house is a dumping ground. Or I could go, you know what, Lisa feels safe and comfortable here and like it's home and she can behave in that way. I have that choice. We have a choice of what meaning we can attach. So maybe if you're in a situation where you're angry at somebody or you're not feeling good enough or whatever it may be, where you think either you're being misunderstood or you're misunderstanding somebody, for me, I would ask the question, could there be another meaning here? And even if you can't see it, if the answer is yes, it's just giving you that breathing space. It's just raising some curiosity. It's your brain not going hard in on finding more evidence to amplify whatever that thing is. could there be another meaning here? And the answer is always yes, because we attach the meaning. We have the power to attach meaning. And yet our brain will go, hey, but this has happened here in the past, so we're going to attach this meaning because it's the quickest way to make sense of this situation logically. But does that, when somebody comes along and surprises you and you're like, oh, I didn't expect you to be like that, because your brain has made assumptions based on past experience that somebody's going to be a certain way and will always be proved wrong. And we have to be okay with being proved wrong, because that's the beauty of the world, when someone comes in and you make assumptions and think, oh, they're just like so and so, and then they'll challenge that and you're like, oh, that's surprising. What our brain does is it wants to make us feel safe and find the quickest logical route. So when we're being misunderstood or we're misunderstanding, just ask yourself, could there be another meaning here? And you don't have to find that. You can, if you want, you can find a new meaning and attach it. Or you could just be like, yeah, I'm just going to release this right now.
Yeah, perfect sense. So what to take away from our show today? Misunderstanding. There's a lot of responsibility attached to misunderstanding, whether you're being misunderstood or whether you're doing the misunderstanding. Take responsibility for the fact that the only thing you can control is how you behave and what your intentions are. If you've got good intentions, if you're going around behaving in a way that's in the best interest of yourself and the world, then don't worry about people that misunderstand you, because guess what? They're just not your people. And the people that love you, the people that are your people, either won't misunderstand you or will say to you, look, there's something going on here. I know it's about me, but I kind of need to get it out. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm saying. And you can talk about it. Challenge your own beliefs. If you're making assumptions and judgments about someone else, that's okay. Forgive yourself for it. It's totally natural to make assumptions and judgments. But then do question them. Do analyze them and think, are these helpful to myself and to the person that I'm making judgments and assumptions about? Would you like to add anything there, Helen, before we close today?
No, I think that's perfect. And I think that we just need to get cool with this stuff. And one thing that you mentioned there is about when we're having the tough conversations and saying, this is how I feel. It's so important that we use that language instead of you made me feel like this. Yeah. Had Lisa come to me on that day last week and said, you made me feel like this because you done this, that conversation would have gone very differently. I would have got straight on the defense and gone, whoa, what the actual? The way she approached that and said, I feel like this. I recognize this is where I'm at. I recognize that this action that you've done triggered that. Very different conversation. Just watching, we have to have tough conversations, especially when it comes around misunderstanding. But we don't have to. There's a choice. You can either bury it and suppress that emotion and probably build resentment and whatever over time, or you can just kind of own where you're at and have the tough conversations, and always coming from a place of, this is where I am at. I recognize this, and this is how I feel, rather than pointing the finger at another person.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to us today. Hopefully you've got a little bit more insight into misunderstanding, and thank you for joining us on the Red Sisterhood Movement little chat. Have a great day, and we will speak to you soon.